Hey, this is Joe Burnett with the Runner team. I'm here with Faus, who wanted to know more about steps. So I'm here to answer any questions you have, and maybe share a little bit about where we're going with this and sort of what the vision is. I'd be love to hear some feedback from your experience with actions, on the model that we have, and yeah, just kind of see what we can share. So
Yeah, great.
what can I
So
tell you?
for me, one of the items that customers struggle with are things that might be grouped together. So the conversation I have on the sales side when I'm working with executives is I sort of break the SDLC into two blocks. So
SDLC?
the software development lifecycle.
Okay,
So
got
from issue to production. So
it.
on the left-hand side, we call it a software factory. And
Hmm.
you could think about this as any factory. It's about getting your product packaged.
Hmm.
So in a regular factory setting, if I was making potato chips, the end state of that factory model is to get my potato chips into a bag or into a box with a bunch of other bags.
Hmm.
Um, so then the other side of the fence is logistics. So once it's been packaged, how do I get it delivered to the location where I need it to go in the most efficient manner?
Hmm. Hmm.
So the way that I explain it to my parents is it's very similar to having a checkout cart at Amazon. You go ahead, you put all your stuff in your shopping cart, that ends up going ahead, the order is finalized, and then you go ahead, it becomes packaged, then Amazon figures out the most efficient way to be able to get it to you. Sometimes it's same day, sometimes it's in 2 days, sometimes if something's back ordered, it might take you a week or two to be able to get it. But
Okay.
all of those things our customers want to automate. They're trying to figure out a way to be able to automate them. And there's uh a lot of the customers are looking at how can they streamline certain areas where, let's say, I've got an ephemeral runner and it's a Docker image and I've got Gradle installed on it.
Hmm.
So how can I do a Gradle build, Gradle test, Gradle package without me having to have three individual jobs
Hmm.
defined inside of my pipeline file? Because
Hmm.
it's gonna be the same Gradle command, just with different switches to run all
Hmm.
three of those, and they want the output of that to be common. So they want an input, which might be what's the JDK that I need, what version of Gradle do I need, and then the output should be an artifact that they may even want to run inside of there. If they're not running our security scanner, they might have a different security scanner for a jar or for something else that they want to use before they
Hmm.
actually publish that package. So that was when I was at GitHub. The first target that we had was it was before it was even called GitHub Actions, and the idea was, the story behind it was we were working with Zydia Labs and they had Excel deploy and Excel release. The customer was, don't know if I should say I'll say the customer name. It was ING in Amsterdam. um and had GitHub Enterprise server, and there was this gap, and they hated Jenkins. ING hated Jenkins. They wanted something from GitHub that would allow them, because they were just spending all this time having agents, what are now called agents, everywhere, and their Jenkins environment was just out of control. They had so many
Hmm.
Jenkins agents running inside their environment. It was hard to be able to build efficiencies at scale.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was one of the first things that we talked about, is how do we shrink this job? So a job is not an individual unit of work, but a job could be a bunch of related work together. And
Hmm.
that is
Hmm.
where steps came in. So an action could uh, be multiple uh, uh, executions from the same execution base. Does that
Hmm.
make
Hmm.
sense?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a lot of what we were trying to solve, what we've been trying to solve with steps. There's other things too about it that we really need, which is reusability and composability. It's hard. Like what we're doing right now is we're programming in YAML, programming these workflows in YAML, and we don't have the good programming stuff we need, right? It's hard, functions are highly side effect oriented. You can't debug them. It's hard to like unit test them. Like we really just kind of need to like break it down, I think a little bit more like a language. And so steps is a much more functional model. Um, you asked about outputs. So at its core, yes, you have declared inputs and declared outputs. Those could have defaults. They're strict. You can't output anything you don't declare, and everything you declare, you must. So it lets you kind of like wire together pretty much anything as like a function with some very rudimentary type checking, right? Like, just kind of help you out. Like, so if it's supposed to be a list of things, if you just give it a string, it'll say your IDE actually can look at the definition of those and say, no, it needs to be a string. Like we've got the step divided into a spec, which is like the function signature and the implementation. And the spec has everything that like an IDE or a human or an AI, actually. We're using this also for AI agents to look at it and read a description, see what type it is, see what needs to go in there, and then kind of follow it from there. And in the implementation, you could do whatever you want. It's an implementation that you could change. And that's really the power. Like one of the things we really want to unlock is the ability to refactor, the ability to iterate. When we ship a step to do something, we want to be able to continue to modify that and improve it and release like new implementations. So it's a lot. It's very much like actions, but we've been a little bit more strict with the core model. The other thing that we've done is we've actually kind of separated the core from the syntax. So the core is defined in a proto, and it really is the bare minimum of what you need. It only has an exec type, which is literally an exec. It doesn't go through a shell script. So that's an important part. One of our important learnings from Runner is doing everything with shell scripts across every platform is painful. You can exec a shell and give it a script. That's fine, but you need to opt into that. So it's exec all the way down if you want. And the other second type is a composite, right? Which is just a list. And I want to talk more about like what that could be, because I think that there's a lot more we can do with that part of the model. But so there's the proto core that the step runner actually operates on. And then there's the syntax, which is a little bit nicer schema. Now we've just created this, so it looks a lot like it already, but like just to kind of get things going, we added a top level script command. And so like what you could do in our GitLab CI is you can say in the job run, and then you can say the name of your step. But instead of telling it what step and what inputs, you can just say script and just write a little script, right? This is just a little syntactic sugar. And what happens is that is compiled into the core by taking that script keyword and actually making that a reference to our canonical script step. And that step will detect your environment, figure out what the right shell is for it, and then execute that. So we have these two models that can move independently.
So one of the big topics that we get from a lot of customers is around salsa and attestations.
What's salsa?
So salsa is a security standard for securing the software supply chain.
Okay.
So there's a chain of custody.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So every time that a job runs, and I know that there are some people that have built on top of GitHub Actions, they have a hardener. There's one company that's built like a hardener. Other people have done some stuff up. Um, uh, the interesting piece is I don't know how this would work, I don't know if every step will need an attestation, or if the grouping of all steps would need an attestation. The nice thing is that in that output, we should require an attestation as part of that output. So it's almost like if I think about a JSON schema, there should be a JSON schema that if you have a set of steps and you have a flag in it that says secure by design or whatever you want to call it, then what should happen is there should be a requirement in the output that an attestation exists in that output. So that way, if somebody doesn't write the steps in the right way that generates an attestation, then the output should always fail. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things we spent a bunch of time trying to figure out is how do you take all these additional, like really important aspects, like your attestation or running a container or VM isolation between steps, add them into this core without making the core get bloated. So we've kind of iterated on it until we were able to make all of those things actually steps themselves. So you could actually say, in the syntax, I want all of these to have an attestation. And it could grab all those steps, put them as a list of input to another step called attestation that could then make assertions about what all of those things output. So it would be very easy. There's a very recursive design to steps so that it can actually even delegate to other step runners and then bring that back up. That's how we're going to do Docker containers and VMs and stuff. So yeah, you could totally write an attestation step that just is able to run a bunch of steps and then do whatever it needs to do to assert the output and then package it up for you, which is great. Another thing I've been thinking about, like these kinds of requirements and reproducibility, and we've been targeting binary reproducibility. So we try to include everything in the output. So you have steps as input, and on the other side you have step results, which is also defined in Proto. Everything in the step results is meant to be able to reproduce that binary precisely. So we capture all the commands, all the inputs and outputs that are executed. When you use a version of a step that's tagged, we figure out the actual hash of that and rewrite the step reference to be that hash so that you could actually replay that output. And it should produce exactly the same binary. So I'm actually like, I've got a pull merge request out for a replay command on step runner. So I created a couple intentionally non-deterministic steps, right? And then I run it and I take the output and I say, replay this. And I assert that the output is exactly the same as it was before, because we're able to give steps previous outputs and they can be responsible for producing the same thing. So there's two parts of it. There's the step reference that I was talking about, which is fixing exactly what version was used. And then steps themselves, since they can do anything, need to also be aware of this, and they need to output what they need for reproducibility as part of their outputs. Like, for example, a git clone step should probably output the hash that it ends up like checking out. So yeah, we're kind of like trying to build like that kind of reproducibility and what you would need for attestations. So yeah.
Yeah, that would be like one of the things that will be interesting, and this is a rainy day scenario, is somebody has a bunch of commits inside of an MR, and we flag the hash of a commit, and then somebody does a squash merge, and that commit's gone. So now what would be the next part of the tree? Is it one of those things that we just flag as you did a squash merge, therefore the commit's gone? We'd love to rebuild this for you, but this is now no longer deterministic, which I actually think from a selling perspective would be very valuable to a organization that has very strict compliance requirements, because now you're showing the impact of somebody making a direct decision to do a squash merge and changing the chain of custody.
Yeah, I mean, like if you've got a registry, if you have a registry of the things we've released that are important to maintain, and as part of their bill of materials are the steps that were used to produce them, you can just read through that programmatically and extract a list of commits that are important to maintain. And then your CI, when you say squash merge, it could just check that list real quick and say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't let you squash this. You're gonna remove a commit that's necessary to maintain our
Wow,
binaries.
that for compliance and policy enforcement, I see so many different things, like being able to have the outputs stored as policies. You could do the same thing, not just with that, but let's say somebody goes in and they try to remove a Docker image or a package, and they try to do it manually, and all of a sudden there's a check that happens in the background and goes, I'm sorry, but this is actually associated with an attestation that we
Mm-hmm.
need because this is actually running in production as part of this SBOM.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
your software bill
Mm-hmm.
of materials, now all of a sudden you've got people that are like, this reinforces the need for having a single platform for everything from beginning to
Yeah.
end. Like I
Yeah.
can't do that. I can't do that enforcement if somebody goes in and deletes it in Artifactory. I don't have that type of connection. So
Yeah.
unless
Yeah.
those artifacts are stored in GitLab, I can't provide that traceability.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that the step results should come up and be stored as first class entities in GitLab at some point. Yeah, and if you make an attestation step that wraps another set of steps, it can even include the subtree of results in the signature. So like the signature on that binary could be like, here's the binary and what was used to build it. So you can't change that either. Like you have a
Yeah.
opportunity to sign the whole thing.
Yeah, one of the items that just from my history building software is like if I'm in a content management system for a law firm,
Hmm.
they have documents that have legal holds on those documents. Like you've
Oh
got to
yeah.
keep them for a certain period
Hmm.
of time.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, having an attestation and saying, okay, because this project has some metadata associated with it, like I can have a topic or something set that I need a legal hold or some sort of compliance. Now I can go through and say, I'm sorry, you're deleting something that has a legal hold against it that until we get to a certain date. So like for some companies, like financial services or insurance, for them to be in compliance, they have to put legal holds on these things for, let's say, up to 7 years.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I just see so many possibilities of, trying to figure out how we weave this in. Who is so I get so this rolls up to Jackie and Flouten, correct? So I'm trying
I
to figure
don't
out
know.
who on the product marketing side.
My knowledge stops at Jackie. I haven't looked any higher than that.
So I'm trying to think because I want to flag this, or I'll work with Jackie. I want to flag this earlier rather than later
Okay.
with the product marketing folks, because this is that we have a field CISO who is a counterpart for mine. So I'm a field CTO. And then
Okay.
we have somebody who's just focused globally on the security side.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I do a lot with the dev experience, the overall software development lifecycle. He works with a lot of security things. So he has created something that he calls secure by design.
Mm.
And I want this this needs to be a part of that secure by design
Yeah. I want
conversation.
requirements. I want people to tell me what they want. I mean, the thing is steps is at this point is building material. So
Yeah.
the more requirements I get, the more I can just kind of smooth path like all these things. Yeah, there's a lot we can do with it.
Yeah.
Uh, I wanted to tell you, or maybe bounce off of you some of the
Sure.
ideas I had um, for what steps can do in terms of like the language of CI and solving problems like sticky runners, right? Like you were describing, like your customers were wanting to just do the things that are basically like repeat, like should be done in the same environment together. And we encounter that a lot with jobs, right? There's a lot of jobs that go do a bunch of work, spend a bunch of energy uploading stuff. The next job comes along, spends a bunch of energy downloading it. Stickiness is not built into the system. And we've been kind of like not really committing to build it because it's kind of hard. Um, when I look at steps, so that's about sticky runners. But when I look at steps, when we have those composite steps, which are a list, I think that we could, in the core, enhance that with the ability to establish dependencies between them, make a little mini DAG out of it. So that there's one use case we already have thought about, which is running them all in parallel. Like if you have a step which is going to pull from your Maven repository, Node.js dependencies, if it's IO bound, you'd like to just do all that stuff in parallel and speed things up. But if you could express dependencies between them, then you could have a syntax over here that compiles stages, right? Like there's no reason that you couldn't like express dependencies between all of these individual steps. You could actually take all the things that we really like about the GitLab pipelines, stages, dependencies, manual actions and stuff, and you could compile that into a lot of the core so that a job could have all the features of a pipeline. And I think that in the UI, we'll want to introspect inside of a job too. Like, in the pipe, you can click on a pipeline. I think rather than like driving everything by logs, if you click on a job right now, you just get logs, right? Rather than driving it by logs, I'd rather drive it by step results. So you click on the job and you see, here's the steps. And you can, when you finally get down to the step that actually runs a command, then you can look at the logs, you know?
Yeah.
And the second kind of like far-reaching thought that I had was if you've got this ability to model a pipeline in a job, you can just take that up one level of abstraction and run the pipeline on the same model.
So have you talked to Victor Nagy at all? Do you know Victor?
I feel
So
like, oh, I was just corresponding with him on another issue. But I know who he is, but I haven't talked with him, so.
so he owns environments.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he and I have been sort of noodling on, I love your idea of, as you're thinking about these things that could be run in parallel, but at the same
Mhm.
time be interdependent.
Mhm.
So, like for me, that is absolutely the way that we should be thinking about deploys into environments. Like,
Mhm.
I see going into an environment and I would have almost a component inside of GitLab that defines the series of steps that I need to provision my VM, set up my RDS data store, configure my security groups, like all these things that I need to be able to deploy that application in a repeatable fashion.
Mhm.
And now all of those steps are then tied as output into an environment. So you'll know if an environment is currently in a state, because the way that I hear you talking about this is it could be pretty easy if I'm then flagging, let's say, the commits or the SHAs back to where the corresponding, like if I am doing everything as infrastructure as code and everything else,
Mhm. Mhm.
I could immediately show you in the environments tab, based on the last time that the steps ran, what does the drift look like for that infrastructure?
Yeah. Yeah. Or
So
the dream as a developer is like, I made a change. Where is it?
yeah,
Is it in production yet? I just wanna see right there on my commit where it is and where it's going.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where having environments, like there's a company called Railway. And Railway is sort of trying to pick up the torch where Heroku sort of fell sort of flat once they got acquired by Salesforce. And it's this idea of building these deployment templates. And I could see defining those deployment templates as steps. And you would
Yeah.
just map those steps back to like, and you could even map them back to, by the way, I don't need my Terraform scripts, my Ansible scripts, my database DDLs. I don't need all of those to be in this current project. Like I could pull in from the environments and say, oh, you need to go get the EC2 Golden Path blueprint from this other project that's in GitLab that this particular project has read access to. I don't need read-write access to actually modify the Terraform scripts. So that could be very powerful because then when you talk about repeatability, it's like, okay, the dev test environment has sort of gotten out of whack and I need to reset it. Okay, well, how hard is it to reset it? We've already got the last known good configuration in steps. So let me just go back and rerun those steps and I'll destroy everything and then just start it over again and recreate it for you based on that last known good state.
Yeah. That seems very powerful. I think, you know, there's a lot of, we wanted to leave room for other syntaxes and use cases to compile to the same proto too. Like, since we were talking about GitHub actions, like when we do incorporate GitHub actions, we've done a couple prototypes. I did one where I actually like hand coded a thing to run it. I did one where I just wrapped act and called it cat. And you know, like, but I suspect that we're going to want to like really invest in a compatibility layer. And we don't necessarily need to make that compile to the GitLab syntax. We can make it compile to the proto. You know, so we have a little bit of latitude, you know, as far as like how we do that mapping and isolate it, right? So we can change this syntax without having to change this translator. So this, what you're describing with taking the idea of environments and doing some complex dependency graph of side effects could be like another syntax that compiles to that proto. But the output of all of those was the same. So yes, you could like, I love the idea of stitching together the whole life cycle on a common data structure where you can actually say, you know, we deployed this commit all the way to this environment through this series of steps. It's very compelling, I think.
Yeah, I do think that if you took that idea of breaking it up into the two steps, so you've got the get me to package. What does the larger proto look like for getting to package? And then what are the subsequent steps that are required? Do you have many protos to get to package based on different languages? Like for me to get to package in Ruby is a lot different than if I want to get to package in Go.
Yeah, and some of those need an environment too, right?
That's right.
Different environments.
Yep.
This is one of the things we were noodling on with like, okay, how do I bring an environment in as a container, continue the execution in there, but still seamlessly incorporate it? And so that's where we came up with our delegation model, where step runner lives in the environment. So when you want to run something in a container, you'll stand up the container with a step runner inside of it. You'll make a service call, gRPC call to that. Now it could be proxied through like an exec. That's how we're, and you give it some steps, and it returns you as output the results. You arrayify those as actual results, not just outputs, and then it just becomes part of the tree. So it's seamless to put something in a container, and that's the exact same mechanism, in fact, that runner is using to inject the steps into step runner. So it's going to use the same mechanism. So we have a lot of different kind of environments where we need to run things. A Kubernetes pod, right? A VM, a container on a Windows machine, maybe. I don't know. Like the runner is now getting more and more specialized on just setting up those environments. Not even like it does auto scaling, but it doesn't know details of them because of our fleeting interface now. And so what it's going to be able to do is it's going to be able to exec to the step runner inside of there to say, connect to the service that's running, run these steps and bring it back. So yeah, so if you have a Ruby thing you need to do alongside a Node thing, you don't have to install Ruby and Node on the same thing. You can just say, okay, run this Ruby thing inside this Ruby container. And all that can, even setting up the environment and how you do it can be part of the sub steps in the implementation. So you could just be like, run this Ruby script, run this Node scripts and this Maven thing, and they can change.
So when are we targeting for some of this to be released? Is this a 17 thing? Is this a
That's a good question. So we've got it broken up into viable, complete, and lovable epics. And right now I'm on the viable one. We've got it, it's like it's usable in production right now. The way that we hacked it in is you specify the latest step runner container and you give it an environment variable called steps. And then you run the thing. So it actually, you can go use it right now. You can use steps in their current form. And it's V0. So every time we change, we're updating it. So it's pretty up to date. To make it viable, though, we need to make it a first-class citizen in the CI language. In a step, in a job, you need to be able to say run these steps. And we need to have the syntax highlighting. It needs to validate it with JSON and pass it through. So that's what we're working on right now. We're pretty close. I mean, the pipeline authoring is, I have an engineer that's getting started on it now. On the runner's side, Axel just finished his proof of concept. He's updating the blueprint and he's full speed ahead for this next iteration to actually plummet through runner properly. So I don't know, when is 17?
June? June would
June.
be 17.
When we release 17?
Yeah.
So March, April, May, June. Oh, that's 4 months. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'd be ashamed if I couldn't get the viable epic done in 4 months.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that I like to think is one of my superpowers is taking something very, very complex and making it very simple for other people to understand. My degree is actually in education.
Love
So
it.
what I would love to do is partner with you because I understand the power that this is going to have to our customers. And we're going to have to enable our solutions architects to be able to talk about why. Like, I'm already seeing how this is. Yes, this is going to look very similar to how I define steps in GitHub Actions. It's going to look like a me too. But I want to be able to say, but there's so much more. Let me explain to you why it's different while also being the same. So, that is something that I can work with Jackie and product marketing on. So
Okay.
as you start to get to certain stages where you're like, hey, Lee, I've got this enabled in a feature flag or whatever, go play with this. And I'm just Faus in GitLab and I've got my own group all set up. I can go in and start playing around with things and start to say, if I got questions or things like that, I can start
Yeah.
documenting things and start getting in front of product marketing ahead of time.
I really need that kind of help. Somebody to use it, play with it as from the perspective of a user and just to see if it satisfies the value, what are the rough edges for sure. That sounds really great. Let's partner for sure on that.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, there's so many things that shake out of this. This is been one of the challenges with steps. It's like I'm creating this thing that doesn't actually immediately provide value, but it unlocks a whole constellation of things. One of the things that I'm excited about is now that we have an agent in the environment running the job, and we have a gRPC service, we can call list to tell me, what are you working on? So now runner, manager can reboot. It can die and come back, or horizontally auto scale, or whatever. It can go find the instances from the instance group and just ask them, hey, what are you working on? And back populate all the jobs and pick up where I left off without
Yep.
skipping a beat. So that's a big availability boost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at GitHub, the first iteration that we built was built on top of Uber's Cadence, which is now Temporal. So it's an orchestration engine that they
Okay.
use. So when you think about if you took ordering an Uber and riding in an Uber into a set of steps,
Hmm.
that's what they use behind the scenes. So it not only supports short bursts of steps, but also longer steps. Like you're in a car and now all of a sudden you want to add a stop.
Mm.
Okay, so now I'm adding a stop. Oh, by the way, I now want to split the bill with one of the other riders in the car. Like all of those things are steps that you can do on the fly and are all managed in Cadence. Like that example that you gave of being able to restart the
Hmm. Hmm.
executor, the orchestration engine. That's what Temporal did underneath, or Cadence did underneath the hood. And then we
Cool.
were using something from, it was a company called Platform 9. And what they did is they had a serverless infrastructure that we ended up starting with that. And then we ended up, so this is a really funny story, is what we realized is Google had just announced some of their Cloud Run capabilities. And they had a limit, though, that you couldn't run anything for longer than 59 minutes.
Hmm.
So the first iteration that we went live with actually leveraged their own agreement. So in Google, you could create email addresses with,
Hmm.
so we would create multiple. As soon as you would sign up for GitHub Actions, we would just create a new email address with a plus symbol. So it was Actions Plus, and we just had this
Hmm.
running
Hmm.
number. And then Diane, what was her last name? She was the CEO at the time. She ended up calling Chris Wanstrath, the CEO at GitHub, and was like, "You owe us $439 million." And he was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, this is for not just what you've already used. Like it was something like we had used something like $250,000 worth of infrastructure." But she was like, "If you continue doing this and we project this out throughout the year, this is what we expect you're going to cost us if you continue going down this path." And all of a sudden, that's when the light bulb went off with her that she was like, "We should just acquire you." And that started the snowball effect from Actions then being the catalyst to uh, Google trying to acquire GitHub, to Salesforce trying to acquire GitHub, to ultimately Microsoft acquiring GitHub, was all based.
They just
It was all
dogpiled
based
on
on, yeah.
it.
So GitHub's infrastructure, when I left, their infrastructure was running them because they run in their own data centers. Was their burn was about 350 million a year to
Mm.
run their own data centers. But the actions, because it was a consumable asset and it was constantly growing,
Hmm.
they saw, well, geez, we can easily get 350 million out of your customers, but knowing that there was a long-term consumable asset on the back end, that's something that Jackie and I are talking about right now is how can I stand up runner fleets? Because right now we make no money on runner fleets. So our customers stand up runners and we don't make any money off of that, but it's got our software installed on it and our customers are setting them up and it's providing a ton of value to our
Hmm.
customers. So how do we find a way to try to monetize some of that? And I think this could be a really key thing of us being able to show how you can drive really efficient workflows through CI rather than the traditional job to job to job type model.
Yeah.
So,
I used to work on Cloud Run.
oh, you did?
Yeah, yeah. I used to work at Amazon, and when I came over to Google, I was working on App Engine,
Okay.
and we were trying to rebase it on Kubernetes. So we started this
Sure.
project to you know, re-implement it. And then we had a big product shift, which is not uncommon in
Yeah.
Google, to create Cloud Run, which is, like one, take all the different compute things and make them one thing. And this is kind of what became Cloud Run and then the Knative project. So the thing
Yeah,
that we were building became Knative. And then we went from there. So it was a lot
awesome.
of fun. It was a lot of fun. Um, yeah, I've gotten a lot of requests and interest in using Cloud Run for runners, as a backend, which I always thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
A lot of our customers are getting to the point that because you have to when you upgrade GitLab, depending on which version of GitLab you upgrade to, you have to upgrade your runners at the same
mm,
time. And a lot of our larger enterprise customers have very large runner fleets.
mm,
And they have to coordinate between when their production schedules are and when their outages may or may not take place if they have to do a large upgrade of GitLab.
mm, mhm.
So um that's where we're trying to attach to that is almost
Okay.
like the dedicated, it's almost runner fleets as a service rather than
Okay.
thinking about them being something that they have to run themselves.
Do you have a few more minutes? I know we're over
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
I have another project. The other half of my brain is up on a project called Grit, which is
Yep.
uh, infrastructure as a library, basically,
Yep.
Terraform templates. And this is what dedicated runners is using. This is what the Google GCP integration is using. And as we're getting ready to upgrade our Linux fleet to our new auto scaling system, the fleeting thing I was talking about, we're going to start dogfooding Grit there. And we're going to be dogfooding Grit in a lot of the end tests. The idea is exactly the same thing that we do for SaaS, we should be able to like do everywhere. Take all of everything we know about running runners and encode it in software. Um, so yeah, when you talk about like some of the challenges of running a big fleet, I think we can, we're starting to get as we consolidate a lot of that infrastructure management into a library that we control, we have a place where we can get a lot of leverage to
Yeah.
solve some of those problems. Like, for example, as we discover more efficient ways to set up runner fleets, with our new auto scaling algorithm, or if we come up with little tweaks, bug fixes, whatever, we can roll it out pretty seamlessly through upgrades of this Terraform library, which everyone just kind of like gets without
Yep.
having to like re-implement best practices. So yeah, if you
Yeah.
have any more thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
that's where because that's one of the ideas that we're throwing around is um when we look at using the
Mhm.
marketplaces because I've had to do a lot of re-explaining the differences between how a marketplace works and sort of what we call rev share. So
Mm.
rev share would be AWS charges $1 for something, and we're
Yeah.
asking them to give us 10 cents every time they charge $1. In the marketplaces, AWS charges $1, and then we can set whatever price we want on top of that dollar. So if we want to charge 50 cents every time there's $1, that's fine. And we did some due diligence last year with some customers and AWS.
Mhm.
And for every GitLab dollar that a customer spends on a license, they spend $5 on resource consumption for runners.
Yeah, yeah. I used to work on
So,
GitLab on Amazon Marketplace.
okay.
We built out the service catalog. I was on the service catalog, so we took like the Omni Marketplace
Yeah, yeah.
and we gave it a common backend for the service catalog, like what do they call their Terraform thingy? The cloud, the infrastructure management
Yeah,
thing, and
yeah, yeah.
also apps on Windows machines,
Okay.
all sort of centrally organized around a catalog. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot
Yeah,
of
the
fun.
piece that I'm talking to the marketplace team around right now is I've explained to them that I almost want a web UI like I get in the console to be able to
Uh-huh.
configure certain things like what size do I want my runner fleet to be? What do I need the project I want to be able to
Yeah,
attach this to?
yeah.
And
This is really interesting. Darwin has created this, okay, so you know
Yeah.
about this. I love
Yeah.
what he created. It's just too cloud formation. It's too cloud formation
Yeah.
centric. And that's why I, decided to go with Terraform, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have a UI, right?
Yeah.
So now that we have, there's a lot of interest in sort of taking the UI for runners more in the direction of Grit, because as it is, the Google GCP, the Google and GitLab integration is based on this. And in the actual UI, you'll be able to configure this and get Terraform as an output and run it. It's basically just exactly that. So I think that we could orient runner management in GitLab to give you that kind of configuration. Like if you
I
want to have policy like dev environments can't use bigger than micro VMs, you could do
yeah,
that.
I'm wondering if I have to, because what would be very interesting is not only would we generate the Terraform, but if you, because I saw I was in the GCP executive briefing this week, so I saw the demo that
Oh
Jackie
yeah,
gave.
yeah.
So in that UI, that you could say, I want to run these on GCP, Azure, AWS, and it just sent the Terraform files over to the marketplace, and the marketplace could just say, okay, go provision me some resources, and you would enter in your, like, you would have to authenticate into your cloud provider to be able to get the account ID of where you're going to actually provision those resources. But that could be very interesting, because then I don't need a separate UI for somebody to go in to then, oh, let me upload this Terraform to go provision it. I could just say, here's your account ID, go take this Terraform and just go execute it on my behalf.
The Google integration is it goes only like halfway because we weren't able to commit to like managing the life cycle of those runners. So we kind of have to say, do this, And actually I think we were considering running it in Google's infrastructure manager so that like Google will actually, actuate that. But on the dedicated side, they have a whole set of infrastructure for that. Their AMP cluster can, they do that. That's what they do is they take a model and they run it. And that's how Cells is going to work. That's how dedicated is going to work. Ultimately, dedicated on GCP and this Google integration we have now should probably converge to the same kind of infrastructure. So like we have a central point for that kind of infrastructure like
Yeah.
actuation. So I think it could be super smooth. It could be great. You could actually be like, okay, this is what we have going for Mac runners right now. This is a really complex use case. And this is like my canonical testing our abstractions. We have our runner managers in Google because that's where all the monitoring and all of the metrics and everything is. But the only provider that has Macs that we want is AWS. So we have
Yeah.
runner manager here, the runners over here, and we have a VPN connecting the two. So like it's pretty complicated the setup, but
Yeah.
there's no reason you couldn't actually do that in the UI. We actually do it through Terraform. That's how we set it up right now. So we
Yeah.
could do the same thing.
Yeah, and I'm putting together, because one of the challenges that sales is having with dedicated right now is there's sort of two parts. One is people are like, I don't understand, if you're running GitLab in an account that you own, how is this different than you having my data running in SaaS? Because they're not concerned about the stateless services and things like that. They're concerned about the actual physical data. And they
Mm-hmm.
need the data for compliance security reasons to be something that they own.
Mm-hmm.
So uh so I'm putting together a thing right now for Sid around what would it look like to provision these resources in a customer's account, where the
Uh-huh.
second part
Uh-huh.
of that is they get steeper discounts than we get. So,
Yeah.
like a Capital One that we're starting early conversations with, they're like, look, we get almost 52% off of all of our AWS resources, but we also have $1 billion commit. Like,
Yeah.
do you have $1 billion commit with AWS? Because you're not getting those deep discounts. So for us, and we're trying to go back and trying to tell them, well, you got to realize that running GitLab actually isn't that expensive. And then they're like, well, if it's not that expensive, then why are you charging me so much? So it's like this back and forth. So that's where like I'm trying to sell Sid on this idea of, well, if we were able to sell runner fleets where it doesn't have to be, because I just found out Sid had put out a thing that there was a service from GitHub called GitHub AE that they just deprecated.
Hmm.
And I talked to a friend of mine, I called him up and I said, "This is true." I wanted fact checked it. And he goes, "It is true. They are eliminating the product because number one, they couldn't sell it. It was no different than somebody trying to use GitHub Enterprise Cloud. So they were like, if I'm going to do this, I should just go to GitHub Enterprise Cloud versus me standing up an environment inside of Azure standalone." The second piece was they only sold it to 3 customers, and one of those customers had a security event. And that security event, because it was a product and didn't fall underneath a service, they passed the fine that they received and they sued Microsoft and told them they had to pay the fine because it didn't follow under what they call indemnity. That if the indemnity rules only applied if they were going to run the service themselves, not
Mm.
if GitHub was running the service as a product. There was no delineation in the legal jargon for that.
Hmm.
So they were like, yeah, we'll just squash it as a product, but they're going to continue doing it as a service. So that's what I'm like trying to get Sid to say, look, so then we go use the runner fleets as a way to go make the money.
You
So
know, we have a lot of flex with some of the abstractions that we put into Runner. We have a lot of flexibility with regard to like how we split this. For example, we could actually still have the Runner manager in our project, but we could have the instance group or auto scaling group in their project and as long as we have credentials to access it, then we could actually run the expensive part in their account. Like we could actually keep a lot of the orchestration over on our side, including auto scaling.
yeah, the larger customers. So I talked to one that's a division underneath Coke, Koch, Coke, not Coke.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so they're a very large conglomerate of multiple subsidiaries, and one of their subsidiaries was telling us they want to get to a model because they're tired of central IT running
Hmm.
all of the runners because the teams are building really crappy pipelines.
Oh, yeah.
So they're
Hmm.
getting charged as a central IT and they're being told, hey, you need to go find cost savings. And they're like, well, let me show you this big bucket of CPU expenditures
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
we're
yeah.
taking on. So now what they want to do is they want inside the, especially for the public cloud offerings, they want the individual projects to have runner fleets in their VPC. That's where they want to execute them. So
Hmm.
anything that is common would be run in central IT, but anything specific. So in your example of a Mac runner fleet, if they've got a mobile app, central IT doesn't want to be incurring the 24-hour charge for the VM workspace. Or like,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
if you're saying you're going to go build it, then you need to go do the cost analysis to say, yes, we have X number of customers that are using our mobile app, and this drives X amount of revenue, and you're willing to pay for the runner fleets to be able to build and deploy that particular mobile application as part of your budget, not out of my budget.
I talked with a customer that had a need that sounded just like that, where they were trying to make it easy for projects to get runners, but they didn't want to like incur all the costs.
Yep.
And in a runner manager, you know, in that config toml, you can put multiple entries, each with their own token, each with their own, you know, tags basically, and pointing to their own resources. So the way that I recommended they set that up was they have the runner managers in their account, which is essentially the orchestration and auto scaling parameters. And they just take customers' tokens and put them as individual entries in there, which would do exactly what I was describing, run the actual fleeting VMs, the actual expensive parts in wherever. It could be even any cloud provider. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty doable.
that's where I want to take that and
Mhm.
charge for it out of marketplace.
Interesting.
So if they're going to charge, say, $1 for a VM to be able to have as a runner, I want to charge $1.50 and then have a service that shows up in marketplace as a GitLab runner fleet, and then you can buy them, and then we would charge on a consumption basis for runner fleets.
So the way that Grit's broken out is into sort of top level Terraform modules. So you can create the runner with your own, you can create it without autoscaling. You can create it with your own fleeting group, or you could just create the fleeting group. So like if the marketplace implementation, right? Like you buy something in the marketplace, if the implementation was to use dedicated to stand that up, like they've already like have the ability to parameterize Grit. So they could be like, you purchased a fleet of runners, and the output is credentials to access that. That could be like all the wiring's all there. It's not, it wouldn't be, you wouldn't be fighting against the grain.
Yeah, because that's what I told Gabriel around the hosted runner fleets. Is I said I know how our CFO works, and he's going to want a high margin. And I'm like, so that means we're going to have to sign up a customer to a cap. So you're going to have to sell it on a yearly basis. And I want to get to the point that we're just selling it on a monthly. So it's like, hey, every month they get a bill, and we're just going to get a piece of the pie out of that. So all kinds
That's
of
really
good
cool.
stuff. So I got another call. I got to jump to here. Where are you based out of, Joe?
I'm in Wenatchee, Washington.
Oh, very cool.
Where are you? You're in North Carolina. I knew that. I saw that.
So I moved. I'm now in South Carolina. I'm on Hilton Head Island in South
Okay,
Carolina.
cool.
I used to live in Charlotte. So
Cool. I like Charlotte.
yeah. Well, great. Well, keep me informed, and I'll let Jackie know and say, hey, keep me in the loop, and I can help do some of the translation stuff with product marketing, so we
Okay,
can get
okay.
this out, because I know a lot of other people. I'm going to let the other people on the field CTO team know that this is coming imminently,
Okay,
and that this is something that we definitely have to talk about, especially around software supply chain.
cool. And when we release pieces or when there's something interesting, maybe
Yep.
I'll just toss it your way, say, hey,
Awesome.
try this out and
Yep.
tell me what you think. Cool. Thanks. I really
Great.
appreciate it.
You bet.
See ya.